All right, so this is the webinar you guys signed up for. Where do I start? Planning the first month of lessons with a low-level ELL student, and presented by Stephen Reid. This is our second year for the Teacher Training Plus project, which is basically a series of webinars, and each webinar is followed by a small group coaching session. The webinars are based on topics that we surveyed a collection of tutors and teachers and program managers to identify what were those topics that or issues that were coming up once you started instruction in ESL or literacy or whatever particular instructional setting you're working in. Stephen was a fantastic presenter last year, and we know he's going to continue to give you guys some great information this year. Before we turn things over to Stephen, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Stephen, if you'll advance. First of all, let's talk about how to use the Zoom controls. What we're going to ask you to do is use the chat function to do things like introduce yourself, to share links and resources that you might use in instruction that you think other people might benefit from hearing about as Stephen's going through his presentation. It's also where Danielle and Lauren will share links that Stephen talks about or brings up in his sessions. And it's also an opportunity to ask questions of the group at large. We're going to ask that you use the Q&A feature to ask questions specifically of Stephen about the presentation. And the reason that we do that is it allows us to track the questions and make sure that everybody's question gets answered. When you put questions in the chat scrolls through, we might miss your question. We will stop taking questions at the top of the hour, but Stephen has agreed to stay on until everybody's questions get answered. So generally what we do, we recognize people have busy schedules. About 2 or 3 minutes before the top of the hour, we'll call attention to the fact that we're going to stop taking questions, give you a chance to get your questions in. People that need to leave will be able to leave. People that want to stick around and hear Stephen's answers can do that. And then we'll run through and make sure everybody's question gets answered so that they'll be on the recording that you get in your follow-up email. Stephen, next slide. Speaking of that follow-up email, we are recording this session, so you will get a follow-up email. I like to say a week just to give us a little bit of leniency in case something comes up, but Danielle is really good about getting those follow-up emails out to you quickly. It'll have the webinar recording. Stephen's going to share his slideshow with us. We'll have a webinar summary sheet that just kind of reviews the key points that Stephen addresses today and has some links to resources and things like that. There'll be a chat transcript, a Q&A transcript, a certificate for those of you who are attending live, and there'll be additional information about scholarships and membership, which we'll talk about in a minute. You'll get a separate email with registration links to the coaching sessions, and you see the links here in the slides. They'll also be in a separate follow-up email. Stephen, if you'll advance. For those of you who attended last year, you may have participated in the small group coaching sessions. So for those of you who are not familiar with them, let's cover what they are real quickly. So about 2 to 4 weeks after let me back up. The idea behind the coaching sessions is we go to a webinar or we go to a workshop, we hear great ideas from the presenter, we go back and we try to implement those ideas with our own students. And a lot of times, because we're not operating in ideal situations, issues come up or we struggle with remembering what Stephen may have said to do or struggling to adapt his particular techniques to the students we're working with. And Stephen's not there for us to ask what he thinks we should do next or how he thinks we should adapt that. That's what these coaching sessions are designed to address. So the idea is about 2 to 4 weeks after the webinar, you've had some time to think about all the stuff that Stephen's covered, thinking about how to implement it with your students. You have questions about that, specific questions, you can sign up for a coaching session. There are up to 12 participants, and really we just kind of go around and each person gets to ask their question. When you sign up for them, you'll be able to put your question that you have into the form, so Stephen will know ahead of time the questions that people have. And it just gives you an opportunity to ask a specific question about your specific instructional situation and get advice from Stephen and the other people participating in the uh, coaching session. Be real clear about what I've been real clear about what they are, an opportunity to get additional guidance. What they're not is an opportunity to get a recap of the webinar or just come in with a question about a totally different topic. So we're going to ask that you really, come in with questions related, at least closely related, kind of tangentially related to the topic of this webinar. We realize we'll give you some leniency there. If you aren't able to attend, we ask that you watch the webinar recording so that you have some specific questions when you come to the coaching sessions. But the people that participated in them last year found them really, really helpful for providing that extra guidance. Stephen, next slide. I talked a little bit about some additional pieces that would be in that follow-up email. One is information about scholarships. So as part of this Teacher Training Plus project, we have $60,000 in scholarships for New Readers Press products. We're giving those out in 60 $1,000 grants. And the idea behind that is, as you are listening to Stephen or some of our other presenters talk about specific teaching techniques or resources, and you realize the materials that you're using with your students now may not be a good fit for using those techniques, you want to try something else out, this gives you an opportunity to go in and order some classroom sets of maybe Laubach Way to Reading or some ESL material, something like that. So $1,000 grant, kind of $900 plus shipping and handling. There's an order form for you to fill out. They're open to anybody who is signed up for any of the Teacher Training Plus webinars and wants to order materials. And it's kind of on a first come, first serve until the money runs out. Membership. As part of participating in this project, we're also offering everyone 1 year of free individual membership to Pro Literacy. And the reason that we're doing that is because we have a lot of great resources for you on our resource website, Pro Literacy Education Network. Some of those resources are have a fee associated with them, but they're free to members, specifically thinking about our basic literacy and ESL tutor training materials. And so giving you that free membership gives you access to all of those materials that would be only available to members or free to members. So like access to the teacher training, the tutor training, access to some of the archived issues of Notebook, our publication for tutors and things like that. All right, Stephen, next slide. I think that's all of my housekeeping, and so I'm going to turn things over to Stephen, let him introduce himself, and he's a great presenter. I think you're really going to get a lot out of this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Todd. I'm going to move on pretty quickly from this slide. If you guys want to read more about me, you'll get the recording of this. You can read it on your own time. But I am the program manager for Literacy Volunteers of Charlottesville, Albemarle, and Charlottesville, Virginia. And we work with people who are learning to speak English, and we do tend to specialize in students who are at the lower end of their language journey, just starting out with learning language. And so we often get students who come to us without speaking any English at all, or those who actually may not even be literate in their first language. And so this entire track is going to be devoted to those students who are at those lowest levels of language learning and what we can do to help guide them on this path. So, so today we're going to be talking about what to do in that first month. And I get this question from tutors all the time. It's like, okay, I have chosen a basic level student, somebody who has no English. Where do I start? What do I do to get started? And so that's what this is about. How do we get started working with that low level individual? So our agenda for today, let's start by talking about some unique challenges that are involved with working with people at this level. And then we're going to look at that very first lesson where you're working, you're just meeting your students, and then kind of what happens over the first week or so, and then how does that expand into the first month. And that should give you a good idea of what you need to do to get moving as you're progressing on from there. But this will kind of help you get started for that first month. I want to start by talking just quickly about the students that I am going to be looking at in this presentation and in my entire track as we're moving forward over the 3 webinars I'm giving. Who are we talking about that are mine? And then who actually fits a little more in that higher level track that we're also presenting. So I'm going to be talking about NRS Level 1. For those who have federal or state funding, you're familiar with the National Reporting System and that Level 1 designation. It used to be called Beginning ESL Literacy, and they just recently changed it to that number 1. As far as the textbooks are concerned, sometimes you'll see it called Intro, sometimes you'll see it called Beginner or Beginning. A lot of times it's basic, and then sometimes it's called literacy. And then we'll also be looking at NRS Level 2, which is that low beginning ESL in the previous names. Textbooks usually tend to call this Level 1. So what I tend to refer to them as are basic and Level 1. And sometimes you'll also hear the basic called like a level 0, like what's before a level 1. But in general, I will refer to them usually as basic for that NRS Level 1 and Level 1 because that's what the textbooks usually call them for that NRS Level 2. And, with all textbook series, there's nothing that lines up exactly right with, between all of the NRS levels and the different textbook series and the standards that we also are working with. So I'm going to just kind of stick to that term, those terms of basic and Level 1. And what I want you to be thinking about as kind of the difference between those 2 levels, basic are the students who come in who have no English or they may be able to speak a handful of words. They are coming to us starting from scratch. Many of these people may not be literate in their first language. Some of them might be literate and just have no exposure to English, but many of them that we come across have little to no literacy in their first language. Many of them may not have any knowledge of the Latin alphabet, and so they may be coming to us from a different alphabet or a different writing system entirely, and so working in our alphabet may be completely new to them. And then in the Level 1s, that NRS Low Beginning, NRS Level 2, they are usually able to speak a few words, some short phrases, not quite seeing those complete sentences yet. They could know as many as about 700 words in English at the start of that level. And so they should have at least a fundamental understanding of the Latin alphabet. and they're just at that little bit a step up above the basic level. So, what are the challenges that we run into when we're working with these two levels? Because these are some unique situations. In the classroom or small group setting, the first challenge you're going to run into is figuring out where is everyone starting. Any of you who have taught a group or a class understands that that you're going to have a variety of levels within your level one class. There's going to be a variety of levels within any class. That's just the nature of what we do. And so figuring out where people are starting can be a challenge. You may also have those situations where you have a student who can read at a level 2 or a level 3, but their speaking is almost non-existent. And then sometimes the reverse happens where you have people who speak fairly well but have no literacy in English at all. And so you have to kind of gauge through where are we starting with each of the individuals, because the testing that you get before coming into the class can only give you so much information. It usually takes us a couple of extra weeks of working with the student before we really kind of hone in on what their skill set is when they get started. It's also important to figure out very quickly who understands the Latin alphabet and who doesn't. That's going to be the first thing that is going to be that you're going to need to look at as you start looking at any sort of reading and writing. Who understands what our alphabet does, and who doesn't understand any alphabet system, and those who have some other writing system that just don't have ours. So working through that throughout the class is going to be important for you. And then you may also have to spend a little bit of time looking for those individuals who have no literacy in their first language and may not be able to hold a pencil properly. They may have literally just arrived and have almost no skills as far as manipulating a writing instrument. And so that's something you're going to want to work on too, because you're going to have those who come through who are going to need that little bit of extra help working on basic writing. In a one-on-one setting, you have those similar things that you need to be looking at, but you're only working with one student, so that makes it a little bit easier. The biggest challenge that you're going to run into is logistics of getting yourself started. If your center, whoever you're working with, doesn't do this arrangement for you, it can be a big challenge making sure that they understand the day and time of that first lesson, and then making sure that they understand going forward when each of their lessons are. And then this is going to be true in a bigger class setting, but it seems to be something that's a little bit worse for those one-on-ones. Whenever you get in that room together, there's a lot of nerves going on from both sides of people who are just not sure about, okay, I am sitting in a room and the only other person in this room does not speak the same language I do. What do we do now? And I think for everybody going into this situation, if you go into it with that attitude like, okay, we're going to figure it out together, that's what's going to lead you with the best results. If both the parties are like, okay, we'll figure it out together, we'll make it work, we'll get through this, and it ends up becoming a better relationship for both of you. So let's dive in. What does that first lesson look like? A lot of what I'm going to be talking about is going to probably be geared a little bit more toward the one-on-ones, but it's absolutely applicable to those who are working in a classroom setting as well. So I think it's important to start with letting them get to know you. The first lesson is always about getting to know each other, but starting with how do introducing yourself, letting your students get to know you. And I like to start with personal photos, things that, pictures that I've taken. There's one with me and Oscar Wilde in the background that I took in Dublin. There's my cats trying to behave themselves. They're only behaving themselves because they know they're getting treats if they sit well for this picture. One of the things I enjoy doing is I enjoy hiking, particularly in Shenandoah National Park, which is right near where I live. And so both of these pictures were taken there. And so a lot of the students may also go, wait a minute, I've been there. I've been to Shenandoah and I've been in that exact spot. So that's something that you can connect with and helping them see you in a more comfortable way will help kind of relax everyone as we're getting started. And so the students are more likely to be like, okay, we're going to be okay. And then also, I like to share some images of that maybe I didn't take personally, but I've done through a Google search, things that will help that student understand a little bit more about me. So, for example, my degree is from Texas State University. One of my favorite vacation spots is going to New York City. I used to live in New Hampshire, which New Hampshire in the fall is gorgeous. And I also used to live in Slovakia. And when I got to Slovakia, I did not speak a single word of Slovak. So I understand exactly the situation the students are coming into your classroom with, because I've been there. I know what it's like walking into a room and being the only person who spoke my language. And so that often helps the student go, okay, he gets it. He's been there and he's going to be able to help me through this. And so we have that connection of being in that environment where I was the only one who spoke my language. And so I can feel for what they're feeling in that moment. You're going to want to ask them to share about themselves as well, things that they want you to know about them. I strongly encourage the use of pictures because that's something, ask them if they have pictures on their phones of themselves or their family, and it gives people a place to start. Remember that at this level, they do not have the language skills or the vocabulary to have much of a conversation. And so it could be an opportunity to pick up some new vocabulary, but trying to keep everything as basic as possible. But sharing pictures that you've taken is a way to make that connection between you and your students. And don't be afraid of Google Translate. I find that with Google Translate, if we're working at words and phrases, it tends to be very, very accurate. As the text that you are inputting gets longer, it starts getting a little wonky. It's getting better, but still, what you're working on with these students, though, is usually very foundation level. So as long as you keep it to words and phrases, maybe short, simple sentences, the translation should be fine. Also, with Google Translate, a lot of the languages, once you translate it, you can hit a little button and it's going to say what it is that you are translating into the other language. That feature is not available in all languages. So sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't, but it is a feature that is available in certain languages. So don't be afraid of those translators as you're first getting started. Now, if I were leading the track of high ESLs, you're going to hear a very different story from me. I don't recommend translators as we get higher level, but once we're getting started, translations can be very useful for you. Another thing I introduced from the very beginning are what I call comprehension cards. I have the students start with these. You can either print them out on individual cards, or they can have them all in on one, and you can use like a little counter, a coin, or a rock or something that you can move back and forth. Most of the students will understand the colors of green, yellow, and red, because traffic lights are universal in color. So everyone who has been in a car will understand green means go, yellow means a little bit or hesitant, and then red means stop. They may not necessarily understand the smiley face, frowny face, but that's something that you can talk about with your student, and it just gives you some ideas. And this is a good way for you to have your student let you know how they're feeling as far as their level of understanding. Uh, it can also give you a chance to practice the sentences: I understand, I don't understand, or I do not understand. So that's also going to be something we're going to talk about in a little bit, but it's a very useful tool for you if you are certain that your student understands and that they understand it's okay to tell you, I don't understand. And this kind of gives them um, an opportunity to voice that. And I was using this in a class one time, and everybody had green and yellow cards up, and I thought, okay, we're trucking. And then I said something, and everyone in the room switched to red, and I'm like, okay, I need to back up and rephrase what I just said, or look at what I did that just had everybody confused. And so it's a good way for you to use that, and kind of give them some ownership of the lesson, and what they need to be able to do to help you as their teacher. Also, it's important to spend some time making sure that they understand the schedule for the class. So bring in that calendar, and so that you can sit down and talk with your student about the dates. This is particularly true with one-on-one. In a classroom setting, that's already kind of built in for the student, but it's less so in one-on-one situations. So have that. I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend having a regular schedule for your lessons. Sometimes I have tutors and students who are like, oh yeah, I'll call you at the beginning of the week and we'll set something up. And that's a great way to never meet. But if you want your student there all the time, build it into their schedule so that they know on Tuesdays at 11 o'clock, I have lesson, and they can build the rest of their schedule around that because that's already built in. I think it's a good idea to have a printed schedule and then write in there on the days and times that they have that lesson. I also find that digital clocks are a little more helpful when working with time, particularly those for those students who are pre-literate. They may not really understand how to read an analog clock, and they're going to have a little better understanding with a digital clock. I think it's also important for you to spend some time talking with your student about what happens if they miss class. In that one-on-one setting, I think it's good to have a set time that they will notify you if they can't come. I usually tell my tutors that an hour before is best, but that's going to depend on the tutor and the student. I have students who drive in from 60 minutes away, that hour commute, so they want to know an hour and a half or 2 hours before the lesson so that they don't drive in. But then I have other tutors who live around the corner from us, and so they're fine a half hour before. That's good for them. So whatever works best for you. In a classroom setting, I think it's still a good idea to set up a way for your student to communicate with you if they are not going to be in class, and that way you're not just left wondering, are they dropping the class, or did they just miss this week? And talk to your student about how important it is that they tell you as early as possible. One thing that I try to do as early as possible is I have the students break out their phones and we practice the phrase. Again, this is for those who have at least a little bit of understanding of the Latin alphabet and maybe a little bit of English. It's going to be easier with those level ones than it is going to be for the basic students. But practice texting the phrase, I cannot come today. And then have them also practice texting me, I will be 10 minutes late. I will be 15 minutes late. And set that up from the very beginning so that you have that practice and have them actually text the number that you want them to use to text you to let you know that they are not going to be there. And with the text message, I cannot come today. Yeah. Do you know much information? No. Do you know why they're not coming? No. Do you know if they can reschedule? No. Do you have the important piece? They're not coming? Yes. And that's what matters. You have the important bit, and that's key. The rest that you can do in follow-ups of some sort, but you have the key information. I cannot come today. And so teaching your student how to text you that is going to be very, very helpful for you and for them. It also will get them in that mindset of when they're at work and they're going to have to be late for work, they can text somebody, I'm going to be 15 minutes late. So they kind of get that in their pattern of that it's important to let people know that they're going to be late for something. So that kind of takes us through what I like to do in the first lesson. But what do we do for the next 2, 3, 4 lessons? We're going to start by building basic vocabulary. And that's always the best place to begin. We're going to start with concrete nouns. We're going to look at action verbs. We're going to look at personal pronouns. And then we're going to look at some useful phrases. It's also good to use about 3 different representations of a thing so that they can kind of understand exactly what we're talking about. If I hold up a pencil, they could look at that and go, okay, is he saying yellow? Is he saying pencil? Is he saying eraser? Is he saying writing instrument? But having 3 different kinds of pencils, and they're all pencils, but they're in different colors or such. Having at least 3 is the best way for your student to understand what's exactly what you're talking about. You can also use either PowerPoint or flashcards to create these images to help your student. And so having something that they can see is great. And then if you create it like in something like a flashcard, like Blue Flash is a flashcard app that I've used before, and something that they can use that you can then down or upload, and then they could use on their own phone. That would be really helpful for them. With those concrete nouns, the brain is very good at mapping names to objects, and that's why I always start with concrete nouns. Because if you are looking at these 3 items, while these are all chairs, they're very different chairs. They look different, they're shaped different, but by having those 3, the student can go, okay, this is a chair. And their brain will map the word chair to that object, even though they look very different. Even if you had like a rocking chair and a giant throne or something, all of those, they will map to the word chair. And your brain is very good at making that map. And that's particularly true when you're working with concrete nouns. So lots of pictures are the way to start with those. I think it's a good idea to use something like PowerPoint if you that you can build that picture library in, so that they can see a lot of examples that will help map that word in their brain. Picture dictionaries are fantastic. They have there's a lot of great ones out there. If you decide to get that New Readers Press um, scholarship that's available, you could use it to purchase some picture dictionaries. The Oxford Picture Dictionary is a great tool that you can use when working with lower level students. Also, Realia, I think, is great, bringing in maps, globes, menus, bus schedules, and when possible, bring in the things that they would see and use in real life. So if you use a bus schedule, get the one from the bus route in your city. If you are using if your student works in a restaurant, get a menu from that restaurant so that they have the things that are important to them in their location. I just find that the more useful it is, the better. The sales flyer from the local grocery store is a great choice as well. But things that they can pick up and touch and move is always useful to help map words to objects in your brain. But by making them the most relevant to their life is going to make it even better.
Stephen, I'm sorry to interrupt really quick, but you mentioned an app just a moment ago. Could you repeat the name of it for us?
Blue Flash.
Blue Flash. Thank you.
Yep. And so after concrete nouns, action verbs are usually the next place to get started. I'm going to say keep them simple. And I don't mean necessarily keep them basic. I mean simple verbs. And I'm going to also include keep them stay in the present. So present simple verbs are the place to start. So I go, you go, he goes, she goes, and not he is going, she is going. So steer clear of those progressive tenses for a little bit. Also, stick with the present. Jumping into the past can get a little complicated because we have a great many irregular verbs and things get a little wonky. And so keep them simple and stay in the present is the best place to start as you get moving. Those other things are going to come up later. But for now, as you're getting started, present simple is the place to stay. And then get up and get moving. And the best way to learn those verbs is by doing it. We walk. Have everybody in the class stand up and walk together. We walk. We walk. And the more you're doing that action together, it's going to stick in the brain a little bit better. Learning while you're doing is a great tool. And sometimes it helps to get a little bit silly. I was walking past a classroom of one of my colleagues, and as I walked past her window, she was standing in her trash can, and she was teaching, and then she stepped out of her trash can, and she was teaching inside, outside, inside, outside, and standing in her trash can. And all of the students in the class were laughing and laughing and laughing. But I can guarantee that they all remember that teacher standing in her trash can. And that teacher is actually in this presentation right now. You actually just heard her voice. She works for Pro Literacy. So learning while you're doing, keeping everybody up and moving is going to help with those things. And don't be afraid to be silly about it. The sillier stuff locks in your brain better. And so help your students, but getting them up, getting them moving, and learning those verbs as you're getting a little exercise. After that, I moved to personal pronouns. Every language has personal pronouns. They may treat them a little different, but they all have them. So the basic concept is not going to be completely foreign, even to a basic level student. But again, I would stick to a very small number as I'm getting started. I, you, he, she, it. That's as far as I would go. Maybe I would jump into we and they, but probably I would stick to these, particularly if I'm working one-on-one. I'm going to stick to these. In a classroom, I would add we and maybe they, but stick to these guys to get started. The others are going to come along as you move further down the process, but in that first month or so, I, you, he, she, it, we is probably as far as I would go. Remember, I'm only talking about that first month, so we're looking at a really short window. The other things, they'll come. We'll get there. But for now, don't try to load too much in. And then I also look at some useful phrases. These are some phrases that I use to kind of have your student to help me help them. They're designed to empower my students, to give them the tools to help me. And if I give them the tools, that's going to let them say, okay, he's told me this phrase. He spent a lot of time early in the training teaching me to say this. Obviously, he wants me to use it. And it's going to help me understand their level of understanding. And it gives them the ownership of their own lessons. I think it's important for you to show them what they can, or have them show you what they are doing. You may need some translator help for some of these, but I do think they're important to teach early on. And certainly the first one is I do not understand. I couple that with I do understand, or I understand, but I need them to be able to say, I do not understand. I think it's also important that they say, can you repeat that? That way, if they think they got it, or they might have got some of it, they can say, can you repeat that, so you can, so they can get exactly what you said. And then, can you slow down? One of the things I always talk to my volunteers, I tell them so often, when you're working at that basic level and that level one, slow down as much as you can, and then slow down from there. Particularly if I'm working with a basic level student, I slow down as much as I can. I also put a slight gap between words. When working with a basic level student, they often are struggling to understand where one word stops and the next word starts, because as we're talking quickly, things kind of mush together. And so putting that little gap in there makes it much clearer, and they can hear each individual word. And so giving your student the ability to say, can you slow down, will be helpful for you to remember that you need to speak slowly. Also asking, having them ask, how do you spell that? How do you spell this word? Or whatever word you just taught them, so that they can write that down. And then, what is this called? And they're holding up their pencil and pointing it, at whatever their object is. Having them be able to say, what is this called? So that they can build that vocabulary of the things that are interesting to them. I think that's going to help you, that these 5 phrases in particular are going to be super helpful for you as you move forward through that first couple of weeks. Then as you slide into the rest of that first month, then we're going to start looking at be verbs. Be verbs, they're all over the place. And so I think it's important for us to kind of start working through those fairly quickly. And I think it's important, again, we're going to stick in that present, and we're going to keep them simple, just like we were with the other verbs. But let's stay with those present, in the present tense at first. Again, past tense will come later. Stay in the present. Stick with those pronouns that we've already been talking about. I am, you are, he is, she is, it is, we are. So working on those pronouns that you've already introduced, and then adding the be verb that goes with it. This is going to help you as you're progressing forward. Then start looking at very basic sentence structure. I think it's important to start teaching this early on. A lot of times you'll see people who don't start doing this until a little further. And I think what happens is people start getting in the habit of answering things in single words and phrases, and it kind of loses the focus on complete sentences, and you then have to work a little bit harder later to get that in. And I think it's important for you as your teacher to model the behavior that you're wanting from your student. When you ask, what is this? And the student says, pencil, then you would respond, this is a pencil, and have them respond, this is a pencil, so that they're used to that pattern of what's happening at each level. The nice thing about doing it this way is it sets you up for substitution drills later. This is a pencil, this is a pen. These are pencils. And so you can make one little change and help them learn whatever the skill is, the new vocabulary, and see it in that same sentence structure by creating those substitution drills. And that's going to help you and help them with the pattern, but it'll also help them with that new vocabulary. And then you're going to want to spend a little bit of time on writing basics. Again, this is going to vary between those basic level students and those level 1 students, because some of them may have some writing skills, some of them may have none whatsoever. But I think it's important for you to make sure that your student can write their own name, they can write their address, they can write their emergency contact's name and phone number, and that they can write the phrase, I speak whatever language. If you can get it to where they can say all of these and write them, again, this is going to be something that's going to be a little easier in that level 1 than it is for the basic level, but it's something that I think that is going to be very important for your student. You may even want to help them create a little ID card. So if they get lost, they can show that to someone, and that someone will be able to help them, find their way home or contact their emergency contact so that they can find out where they are. And knowing what language they speak is going to be helpful for whoever it is that they're talking to. Okay. And then from there, build on that with the names of their children, the names of their spouses or other family members, where they work, other important names that they may come across. And so building those that limited vocabulary in their writing, tying it to the words that are important to them, like their name, their children's names, their spouse's names. But so I think it's important to learn the important letters first. And by that, I mean the letters, if you're working that with those basic level students, those who are just learning to write, the important letters are going to be like the letters in their name, their letters in their spouse's name, the letters in their children's names. Okay. And then from there, help them kind of create the alphabet by filling in the remaining letters later. I do not recommend starting with A and going to Z and learning all the letters in order, because if you think about what we have 26 uppercase letters followed by 26 lowercase letters, and that can be overwhelming. That's a lot to expect your student to learn in a short period of time. And if you think about how long it took us to learn that when we were kids, and how much slower our brains work as adults than they did as kids, that's going to feel very overwhelming. And so stick with the letters that are important first, and then you got to fill in the gaps. Okay, so that is going to take us to questions. And I'm going to stop sharing and let's look at what we've got in the Q&A. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, not in the chat. In the chat, they are likely to get lost. And so if you put them in the Q&A, we can use that as a way to kind of gauge which of the questions I've already answered. And so that way you can, we can kind of map which questions get asked. And we have about, about 8 more minutes until the top of the hour. I know that a lot of people are going to have to cut out. The recording is going to keep going, and I'm going to keep answering questions until we get through all of them. If you have to leave, don't worry about it, because everything is going to still exist in the recording, and you will be able to go back and listen to them later. Okay, so let's see what is in.
Are you going to read them, Stephen?
You can if you want.
Whatever's easier for you.
How about you read them and I'll answer them?
Perfect. Okay. So the first one is from Donna. Will a copy of the green, yellow, and red cards be available in your follow-up email?
They exist in the PowerPoint, but I do have those on a card. I can send that to Danielle today, and she can include that in the follow-up email. That is very easy to do.
Perfect. Okay. And is the stoplight green, yellow, red a learning theory? Do we tend to use in other learning settings such as elementary?
I am going to say that I don't have the exact knowledge on that. I just know that the idea of go, slow down, stop is universal. And so it's helpful with adults because most adults have worked or are at least somewhat familiar with driving. Beyond that, I know that most cultures do use red for like the stop sign. And so younger kids may understand that as well, but I can't say that it's universal across for everything.
Okay.
Okay.
This, I'm not sure what it was referencing. This came on early on, but the question says, this seems like an important thing to translate. Other ways to communicate this?
That was referencing the class scheduling and when to let your tutor or teacher know you couldn't attend classes.
Yeah, I agree that putting that through a translator is probably helpful. If you're working one-on-one, you may want to see if they have somebody who is available to help translate if they are not literate. If they have a spouse or a family member who could help with some of that logistics, I find that often is necessary. It's a challenge, though.
Okay, next one from Kay. If the person doesn't speak English, how could you communicate what the comprehension cards mean? How would the student understand the text you are trying to teach them if they can't read, speak English?
Nodding and shaking of the head, facial expressions, body language, all of these things can be used to help convey the idea of I understand, I do not understand. So you're going to find that you're going to be using facial expressions and body language a lot when working with the basic level students, and use it to your advantage. And again, feel free to make it silly because that's going to help. But using the nodding, using the shaking of the head is going to be very important in that toolbox for you. And then, because even like all languages have the concept of yes, no. And so being able to translate that is going to be helpful. if you can translate into their language and that you could speak it in some way, they would be able to understand the concept.
Let's see. Do you start with concrete nouns before alphabetics?
Yes, 100%. Even if somebody is pre-literate, fully, completely, totally pre-literate, and they have no literacy whatsoever, I would start with concrete nouns. Like I said, this question, I think I answered it later in the webinar, but alphabetics are not something I start terribly early, and particularly the whole idea of learning the entire alphabet, but learning how to do, writing some of those basic things that can happen, but those nouns, absolutely. I would start nouns, verbs, pronouns. I would definitely start that before I'd start alphabetics.
Okay. Another question from Donna. What is the name of the flashcard maker? Is it free? Does it make printable and digital flashcards?
So it is free. I am so cheap when it comes to apps. Like, if it costs more than $1, it better be good. So cheap. So Blue Flash is the name of that, and the one I've used in the past. But you can also just Google any, go to your app store and type flashcard maker, and most of them will, they'll all have very similar functions, and so. What I find is the most useful for me is one that I can create my word list in a spreadsheet and then upload it. That's going to be really helpful for you. But Blue Flash is one I've used in the past.
And to that point, Go ahead, Lauren.
I was going to ask if you could include a link to Blue Flash in your follow-up materials, just so people can find that.
Will do.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so this question's from Tamar. Do you think it's very important to use do not versus don't with this level?
I think it's important to use both at this level, and so that they understand do not and don't mean the same thing, because the reality is, as they're moving forward, they're going to hear both very, very regularly. And so teaching those contractions as you're teaching the do not and teach don't at the same time, I think is going to be super helpful, because they're going to understand, and you want them to understand, that do not and don't mean the same thing.
Sorry, I'm going back up. Let's see. Question from Sanford. What is the recommended length of time scheduled per class?
Okay, that's going to vary. I think that 1 hour is good. An hour and a half to 2 hours can get a little long, so make sure there's some breaks in there. Longer than 2 hours, you need to have a couple of breaks. But if you're in a large class setting, 3 hours can be useful. If you're one-on-one, I would not go beyond 2. And then that's also going to depend on the method of delivery. If you're in person, 2 hours is fine. 2 hours on Zoom is difficult if it's working in your first language. So doing that in a new language is torture. So I would stick to an hour if you're working remotely.
Lisa asks, do you advocate using contractions early on?
Yep. Well, I just answered that with don't. And
Yeah, you did.
So I still do. Yeah.
Carol asks, my students are Afghani ladies with no English at all, and they are illiterate in their own language too. They do not know how to spell their first names. We spent much of the year trying to figure this out. Help.
Okay, I am very, very, very familiar with Afghan ladies who are not literate in their first language. That is a very, very common situation in my center, and so I get it. And so the reality is they don't have a connection to writing in their own system, and because they don't They don't write in Dari or Pashto, and they may have seen the Arabic alphabet growing up, but they don't have a connection to how it works in their language. So there's no connection to it in English as well. And unfortunately, practice is probably the most important thing, but going at it for a year and they're still not being able to recognize their own name, that's actually very surprising to me that they've been attending class regularly for a year. Typically what I see is after a month or so, most students would be able to recognize their own name and would know how to write their own name. If you are at that much of a disadvantage, you may want to just go back and start looking at making sure that they are they're understanding that each of the letters represents a sound, and that they are connecting those sounds, those letters to those sounds to the name, and working one piece at a time in that direction. But that is certainly a challenge. But a full year without being able to write their own name, that's quite surprising. That's not something I've seen.
Okay, thank you. Zoe asks, by introducing alphabet letters by importance first, do students ever struggle with alphabetization later on? Sorry, I messed that one up.
Typically, no. They understand that all of these are a piece, and then that we put them in an order later. But yeah, I haven't really seen that as an issue.
Okay. Nancy asks, is there any time that phonics come into play?
Later. As you're first teaching them to write their name, making that connection between this has a sound that does this. And so, if we're writing my name, sa is the S, ta is the S and T together make the sta, and then an E, and then the va, and then an and an N. And so I would pull that in as I'm doing the writing, but it's not something I would harp on a lot. Like, we're going to work on phonics today. That's something that's going to come later.
I know that you did mention this in your presentation, but this is just a follow-up. What app would you recommend to use from voice to text?
So the one I have used the most is Google Translate, because that will usually take voice to text fairly easily, but it's not always accurate.
Emma asks, how do you determine the most important letters when introducing the Latin alphabet?
The letters in their name, the letters in their address, the letters in their spouse's name, the letters in their kids' names, the letters that they will use. And so the most important letters to me are not going to line up to the most important letters to Danielle. But yeah, so you're going to work through it individually with your student.
Okay. What if your learner is very interested in controversial basics, like trying to talk to their students' teachers?
That's conversational basics.
Yeah, you're right.
And like controversial basics, I would avoid those early on. Conversational basics, on the other hand, yeah, that's really kind of where you're aiming early on in your lessons. It's really about building their ability to have very basic conversations. And that's why I don't spend a lot of time harping on alphabetics early on. Let's get them speaking first.
Can you recommend a pre-literate student and workbook?
So I use the Venture series from Cambridge University Press. They have a basic book that I really like. Their basic book also comes with 2 different workbooks. One of their workbooks is called Basic, and so it's a little bit higher. Then they have a literacy level textbook, which goes through and helps with the alphabetics part. And so that's just the series I like. There are lots of textbooks out there that are good, but that's one's kind of my favorite.
Okay. All right, let's see. I'm just going through some of these that have already been asked. Do you teach them to print lowercase or do you start with uppercase?
That's a great question. I do tend to mix it up, both upper and lowercase. Yeah, a lot of times I will see people learn to write in just uppercase at first, but I think mixing it up is going to be helpful. Although I know it can be confusing. Okay.
Let's see. This might be too broad of a topic, but any advice on how to juggle the basic and lower ELLs with higher level beginners in one beginner classroom?
Best of luck. So sometimes what I would do is I would enlist the help of the higher level students to help me with the lower level students, particularly if they work in the same language family. Having everybody working together can be useful. But the reality is, if you've got a giant class and you're everywhere from basic up to level 2, you just have to do a lot of differentiating in your instruction and spending some time working a little bit with everybody, and pray to God you can find a volunteer to help you in that class, because it's a lot easier to teach a level 3, 4, 5 class than it is to teach a basic level 1, 2 class. So yeah, unfortunately, the best I can offer is spend a little bit of time, kind of group them together, or have higher level students help you.
All right, I'm going to take over questions while Danielle pulls up some links. We still have a lot of questions coming in here, so hang on, it's just jumping around for me.
Okay.
If the learner's spouse speaks better, should I include them in a lesson?
You should include them in the logistics part at the very beginning and at the very end, like let's make sure that we understand how long the lesson is today and our next lesson is at such and such time. But during the lesson itself, no, it's actually going to be slowing you down because they can jump to their spouse and have them translate things, and so they're not learning quite as effectively. You're better off saying, thank you, I really appreciate you coming in and helping, and we'll see you in an hour.
Great, thank you. Do you recommend in-person versus virtual learning when working with low-level ELL students when possible?
Okay. Online learning is great as a worst-case scenario, better than not learning at all. In-person is going to be more effective in almost every single situation. So if given the option, go in person. If there's no other options, online is okay.
And speaking of online, do you have any online resources that you like for basic students? Maybe you want to include those in your follow-up materials, links, if you have them.
I could look, but I don't have anything that's like off the top of my head jumping up.
Okay. When working on pronunciation, would it be good to work on pronunciation of important words first as you go?
Work on pronunciation every single time you teach new vocabulary. Get that pronunciation right from the very beginning, because if you don't, they are going to mispronounce that word for the rest of their lives. Have that pronunciation locked in as you're teaching every new word. Every time you teach a new word, work on pronunciation with that word.
Do you
And
recommend?
I actually have a wonderful webinar that you can go to the Teacher Training Plus website and watch my webinar on pronunciation.
Yes, you do. Good way to plug yourself there, Stephen. Do you recommend repetition drills using pictures to teach vocabulary?
I think repetition drills are going to be useful for everything when you're working at that level. Pictures are a great way to tie all that together. Yes.
Okay. In teaching those basic phrases that may help the student indicate their level of understanding or need for help, how do you approach pronunciation with students whose first language does not contain the necessary phonemes?
And we get to teach those phonemes because that's going to be something that's super important early on. Teaching in Slovakia, they don't have a th, and I spend a lot of time teaching people how to use the th sound as we're learning that new vocabulary, because the is all over the English language. And so I think it's very important to start teaching those phonemes from the very beginning. And, again, don't be afraid to feel silly about it, but really work on looking at what's your face doing to get to that sound is going to be really, really helpful, and get it from the beginning.
Even using a mirror if needed.
Absolutely.
A couple of questions here about translation. Do you have any feedback on mass translation devices where the students wear an earpiece or things like that would translate what the teacher is saying? And then where do you see that point in which translation stops being useful?
Okay, I'm going to start with I have no personal knowledge of those mass translation devices. I've never used them, so I do not know how good they are. So I really don't think I can speak to that. As far as where do translators stop being useful? Again, I'm going to be referring to what I see in my textbook series. Usually by the end of level 2, I have everyone stopping using translations. This is probably about NRS level 3 that we stop using translators. By level 4, they should not be using a translator. They should be using an English-only dictionary. We're by NRS level 4, which is textbook level 3-ish, depending on the series. The new vocabulary has a nuanced level to it that translators aren't going to be as accurate. And so your student is going to be much better served by going to an English-only dictionary. I recommend a dictionary designed for elementary or middle school kids because the definition will be easy enough that they can understand it. But NRS level 4, textbook series levels 3 usually is where I find that should stop.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But quite a few questions here, but I'm going to group them into 2 questions to kind of finish up here. One is about standardized assessment and what standardized assessments are most appropriate for these lower level students.
Okay, so we use the Best Plus testing for speaking and listening, and I think that I think it's pretty accurate with those level 1 students, and for a basic student, because a basic student is just going to stare at you blankly through most of the test anyway, and you're going to get 4 questions and you're going to like, okay, thanks, that's where we stop. But for speaking and listening, I do find that the Best Plus is pretty accurate. I don't currently use a reading and writing test at this level. My experience in the past is CASAS is pretty helpful, but it's pretty helpful assuming you have a student who has a working knowledge of the Latin alphabet. As you're moving further up, as you're moving further down, I don't know if it's that great. But again, it's not something I use, so I can't really say strongly one way or the other.
Okay, thank you. And so the last question has to do with the cultural aspect of the classroom. And so on one side, how do you handle the students' culture that they bring into the classroom with them? whether that's their understanding of these new words, they're shaking their head, yes and no. How did you teach these things? And then also in conjunction with American culture, using child level materials in the classroom. Do you find that appropriate?
Okay, so as far as using their culture in your classroom, that is the joy of teaching a large class, is having the variety of cultures in the room. That's what makes it so much fun. It gives you that opportunity to learn about other cultures, and it gives your students a chance to learn about each other. And it's just the most enjoyable part of teaching a larger class. But you're going to be also wanting to incorporate the basic understanding of how American culture works as you're going through that, and that idea of, well, this is the way we do it here. How do you guys do it in your country? And that can be a great tool for all of you. And it can be a lot of fun. The second part of that question was
related to American culture and using children's materials.
Okay. You're about to get me up on a soapbox. I do not recommend using children's literature or children's learning material with adults. There are some great resources out there that teach you even the very basic level of language to adults, and pick material that is designed for adults. I don't ever want my students to feel like I'm talking down to them or treating them like children when they come into my room with such a rich history and background of their own, that it would be insulting to be teaching them to count using dancing elephants. Like I said, this is a soapbox that I'm proudly going to crawl up on. And so definitely, I think it is best to use material that is designed for adults when working with adults.
Definitely. Thank you. And there are some great resources out there. I'll point people to our scholarship again, where we have many level appropriate materials for low-level ELL students. And that scholarship link will be coming with all of the follow-up materials. So I think we've gotten to all of our questions here. I'm sure we could spend another hour. And I want to thank the 100 people who hung in here all the way to the end.
Wow.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'll just remind you, Danielle has put the coaching session links into the chat. So if you want to continue on this topic with Stephen, which I do highly recommend, please sign up for one of those coaching sessions, and you can pick his brain a little more, get more questions asked, and really dig in. And then Danielle has also put the link for the evaluation into the chat as well. And we'll be sending out all of the follow-up materials, including the link to this recording and links from Stephen. We'll be sending those out later this week. And we want to thank all of you for coming. We look forward to Stephen's next webinar in January. All those links are on our website as well. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. So thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you everyone for attending.
Please sign up for a coaching session. They're so much fun. Those of you who attended the coaching sessions last year know what I'm talking about. They are a great opportunity for us to get together and have some amazing conversations. I have been looking forward to coaching sessions all summer, so I'm very excited that they're coming back around.